All right, welcome back everyone to Friendly Tech Chats. We're talking about mocks. Last week we discussed what we dislike about them. So today we want to go into when is it actually good to use mocks? What is, uh, despite all their downsides, what when should you use them anyway? So Mikola.
Yes. So originally, the first time I encountered the mocks, it was in a seminal book about refactoring legacy code. And I think that gives us the first example where you do want to have mocks when you're doing a refactoring to fixate a part of your system, then do the change and eventually probably remove that fixture, remove that mock. At least for me, that was the original way how I was using that.
So it's basically introducing a facade that is a clear boundary from this part I will refactor now, and the things behind the facade I'll refactor later. In a way to keep refactoring legacy code manageable.
Yes, because again, it comes back to other workarounds. We will look into the other workarounds, but many of them they will require change. Well, change of how your code is structured. But if you already have
Yes.
not very testable code, then you need to start somewhere and disassembling that pile of untestable code. Maybe it's a good code, but it's not done testable enough. And then the mocks can give you a good cutting, slicing facility for that.
I do use mocks regularly, and oh yeah, what I was thinking about it is, for me, it always provides an easy starting point in the early parts of development of functionality or a application. You introduce a dependency and you want to not think about this for a while. Then you can introduce a mock, and then as you add more and more tests, the relationship between the mock dependency and the feature that you're building becomes clearer, and at that point you can refactor it to, for example, a fake, or maybe refactor the code under test. So I think that's the main way I use mocks.
Yeah. Okay, check. It's a little bit similar to the first one I think I mentioned, but from a different perspective. So I
Yeah,
was talking
yeah,
about legacy,
exactly.
you're talking about new, but you're fuzzy about
Yeah,
you need to have a starting point. I
yeah.
Now that I think how you're using, I actually don't use mocks at all in many of my in my greenfield projects. It's possible. Maybe it's a little bit overkill because when I'm not using, I have to play a little bit with exceptional situations. So for exceptional situations, I will probably say having mocks is good. And it's either in isolated test that I'm testing like this call to some system and then I'm injecting errors. Or maybe if I'm
Yeah.
having high level, then I will be using more like spies, wrap a real dependency and inject in the more convenient places some consistency error which would be too difficult to reproduce reliably, for example, or something that is much easier basically to just say inject a random response somewhere, deviations from the normal flows.
But here you come on the thing you mentioned last week, where mocks make it easy to test impossible situations.
Yes,
So
there
if
is a
you
danger. Yes, there is a definitely a danger, but if I saw something like on production, for example, or I reproduce something manually with a test, but it's too complicated, too clumsy to have it constantly in
yeah,
CI, like some consistency, simultaneously calling,
exactly,
updating the data.
yeah,
I've done a couple of tests like that in the suites, and I was very proud. I'm not sure that people who inherited them
yeah,
enjoyed them. They were
yeah,
work like stress pounding the same entity with simultaneous requests, but usually it's not very practical to reproduce some
no,
things.
yeah,
So you
yeah,
might get somewhere the input, you saw how it happens. Maybe it will not be happening in the future, but you say, I want my code to be able to handle this situation. So in some
yeah,
place you're injecting, okay, here you got this exception with this
yeah.
message maybe, and then I expect that a certain behavior from my code.
Yeah, like forcing state that would normally be reached through concurrency issues, I guess, is an obvious one.
Yes, and you can always work this around with some kind of clever fake and so on, but it's just from the
Yeah,
practical point
exactly,
of view,
exactly.
you say, okay, normally we're working this way, but just here
Yeah,
I am inserting something. And again, I really like
yeah.
spies for that. I will just wrap with a spy and say, okay, now for this call, blow up with this exception.
Right, right. Yeah, 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 yeah. Exactly. Otherwise, you're looking at countdown latches and stuff like that, and it probably will work, but it's then you have complex test code, which is has its own kind of downsides.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And not very obvious what is happening, not always very deterministic.
No, exactly.
Where another place where I would be more inclined to use mocks is the connection to external systems. So if I have my system, so far we've been mostly talking about mocks internal of our internal components, but eventually at some point you will reach the boundary of your system. So you don't want to test with the whole internet, so you will need to replace it with something else. And there often it would be convenient to use some kind of mock. It would
So
be
why not a fake then?
fake would be actually I prefer fakes more. Yes, that's true. But that on for and by default I'm using fakes honestly. But
Okay, yeah,
again, that's from pragmatical point of view. Sometimes you can say, okay, it's that particular external system. We almost never call it, so it's easier to do with just mock. Put wire mock, say when you will get this guess, always return this one, and it's fine. Because fakes are a little bit
yeah,
more. You need to have some small servers, HTTP or something, depending on the type of dependency. Can be a little bit more
yeah.
involved. So usually I'm starting with the mocks, but also very often I'm switching eventually to the fakes because they are again the same way as in process. It's much easier
Yeah.
to work if you need consistency, if you need dynamic responses with the fakes than with the mocks.
Yeah, basically, if you need remote state, right, then you want some
Yes,
kind
if
of
you want to have
fake.
a remote state logic, like I want to reject anything that is coming without this field
Right.
filled in. It's still always possible with modern mocks, but just more cumbersome. That's it.
Yeah, the problem with putting logic in fakes, however, is aren't you then duplicating the logic that is in the remote system?
Maybe you
Right.
want to have it as minimal as possible.
Yeah.
Ideally, you just want to pass it and come back, but sometimes it's convenient. Say I am sending something to downstream system, and there are certain expectations, and there is a chance that it will be breaking. I know that I've had a couple of times I broke it. Why not to add to the fake that is
Yeah.
receiving this data just instantly saying, well, some validations that I'm putting myself. It's not that I'm reproducing actually the system. It's just I want to ensure that when I'm sending this data to that system, I'm filling in this field or I have no dashes in this field.
Right.
Because
Yeah.
then we have always a problem. So those things I would add. Of course, well, I will usually not be reproducing the full behavior of the other system. Although sometimes you can do that, but usually then you would prefer not to reproduce it yourself, but take the other system, maybe lightweight version, and that's we will talk about this probably in the next video about the workarounds for the
yeah.
mocks,
Yeah. Exactly.
and
Yeah.
use it in your build. And okay, maybe it's important also to notice that there are two schools of thought how to use mocks and not to use. So I am definitely very strong on the no mocks or bare minimum mocks. There are people, quite well educated people, who do use regularly mocks. I think you are a little bit closer in the middle
Definitely.
because you're starting
Yeah.
with the mocks and you're refactoring and so on. I'm a
Yeah.
little bit more averse from the mocks, but there are people who will stay with the mocks. They prefer to stay with the mocks, and I think to make the things working, they have other techniques because if they just stay with the mocks without any guidance, any governance, then you will end up with the average boilerplate of mocked behavior everywhere in the test. But there are people who probably can do good tests with mocks. I guess again they are restrictive in those things, but I don't know because I haven't seen many good tests with mocks. I mean, when the mocks are used regularly in the test suites, in my experience, because usually it goes
Yeah.
very quickly deteriorating if you
Yeah.
don't restrict it very strongly.
I usually find that um, the higher quality I get my tests, the less mocks I use. And I think this is the like me experiencing what you just described.
Yes, I think now that we're talking when we could use mocks, there are also the places where we should definitely not use mocks. And one
Oh
just
yeah,
popped up in my mind. That's DTOs. That's the most horrible thing that I would see is just plain objects that data transfer object is mocked, like it gets mocks. I have
yeah.
seen it more than one account, and I just don't understand.
I have seen it too. Yeah,
I've seen
this is a really bad idea.
I've seen this a reasonable use because some of the libraries are becoming overly protecting about the internals, and I think
yeah. So then it's basically a legacy code facade.
yeah, in a sense, like
Yeah.
I think what it was. I was trying to emulate something in PubSub in the earlier versions of Google Library, and I think there it was quite difficult to create those messages. So I might have been driven to that, but at the end it was possible still to create a fake message, fake things that you would get from the driver.
Yeah, so indeed, if you have like domain objects that are tightly coupled through a strong hierarchy to external technologies that introduce all kinds of fields that are not really related to the data that you're actually accessing, but maybe you're having different problems then.
Well, if you have domain objects tightly coupled, yes, you have another problem, and that's a good indication that you shouldn't be coupling that tightly. But sometimes you do want to test something that you process the objects that you got from a library or framework properly. So you want to have the DTO, and sometimes it becomes difficult to construct it because the construction is hidden somewhere, made private, protected, or whatever, and then you need either to hack with the class passes and say pretend that you are creating something in that class in the same package in Java. We're talking about Java, or rely on the mock saying, okay, screw that, I am just mocking that object. Say I got this mock of the stupid getter and setter, and I will be returning those things. Happens. But if the class the code is under your control, you should definitely stay away from it. So services okay, understandable, especially with dependencies to external services. Yes, I would prefer to minimize this, but okay, if it's not a blasphemy, it's not a sin to mock them per se if you're following the school of mocking. Objects, plain objects, a very, very bad sign. Static functions also are reasonably bad, I think, and functionality, that one I also prefer to minimize the mocking, because why not just to use a real function, unless there is a good reason, like it has its own dependency or it has very non-deterministic nature, then you might want to simplify your life.
But there is, I think, workarounds for those that we'll probably address in the next episode.
Okay, and you're hinting that it's time to finish.
Yes, exactly. And once again, thanks a lot. I think it's I'm quite happy that we're finally actually addressing the mocks that we've been talking about for so long. Please let us know what you think about mocks, where you fall in the spectrum of usage of mocks, and
let us know if you missed any very good use case for the mocks.
Yes.
That's we're always interested to know.
And have a nice day.